Colorado Territory, winter of 1874. The mountains rise like broken teeth against a sky bleeding purple and gray. Snow covers everything. The pines, the ridgelines, the narrow trail that winds upward into nothing. Far below, a town sits in the mud. One road, a few crooked buildings, a stagecoach pulling away in a cloud of frozen breath and wheel dust, and a woman standing alone where it left her. She wears a crimson dress, wrong for this place, wrong for this weather. She holds a leather valise tight against her hip. Inside that valise, hidden beneath the lining, a two-shot Derringer and a notebook filled with secrets that could bring an empire to its knees. She is not who her letters say she is. 3 men are coming down the mountain to collect her. They don't know what they're bringing home. Neither does she. Somewhere east, a man in a gray suit is asking questions, following a trail of stagecoach tickets and borrowed names. Getting closer. The snow is falling harder now. The pass will close within the week. And once it does, there is no way out for any of them. The stagecoach left her standing in the mud. Just like that. Door swung open. Her one leather valise hit the ground with a soft thud. And the driver didn't even look back. He cracked the reins. The horses lurched forward. The wheels carved fresh ruts into the half-frozen road. And Lenny Cahill stood alone in the middle of Sparrow Creek, Colorado, holding a letter she had read so many times the creases had turned white. October. Late October. The kind of late that smelled like a warning. The town wasn't much. A single rutted road flanked by buildings that looked like they were leaning on each other for moral support. A general store with a sagging porch. A saloon with no name, just a crooked sign that read beer in letters someone had painted with more enthusiasm than skill. A livery stable. A church with a steeple that tilted slightly left, as though even God couldn't stay straight in this wind. And wind there was. It came barreling down from the peaks to the west. A raw, biting thing that cut through Lenny's crimson traveling dress like it wasn't even there. She pulled her shawl tighter. Her fingers were already numb, her cheeks already stinging. The hem of her dress was soaked from the mud, and the hem dragged heavy against her ankles. She looked down at the letter. Dear Miss Cahill, I am not a man of many words, but I am a man of my word. The cabin is warm, the mountain is quiet. I need a wife who is not afraid of either. If you are willing to make the journey, I will be waiting at the Sparrow Creek Station on October the 28th. Sincerely, Everett Drummond. October 28th. Today. She was here. He was not. Lenny scanned the road. A few men loitered outside the saloon, their hats pulled low, their eyes doing that lazy drift that wasn't lazy at all. Measuring her, the red dress, the honey blonde hair escaping from its pins, the valise that suggested she had come from somewhere else, somewhere softer. She hated being measured. A woman appeared on the porch of the general store. Stout, gray-haired, arms folded across a flour-dusted apron. She watched Lenny with the kind of frank curiosity that small towns specialize in. Not unkind, but not warm either. You lost honey. Lenny straightened her spine, pulled her chin up. I'm expected. By who? Everett Drummond. Something shifted in the woman's face. A flicker. Not quite pity, but close enough to make Lenny's stomach drop. Drummond, the woman repeated. She wiped her hands on her apron slowly. You're the mail-order bride. It wasn't a question. I am. The woman studied her for a long moment. The red dress, the pearl earrings, the small gold cameo at her throat. Everything about Lenny said East Coast. Everything about Sparrow Creek said you should have stayed there. I'm Prue Gandy, the woman said. I run the store. You'd better come inside. Those boys are always late. Boys, plural. Lenny caught the word but didn't question it. Not yet. She picked up her valise, followed Prue up the creaking steps. The inside of the store smelled like coffee beans and saddle leather and something sweet. Molasses, maybe. Prue gestured to a wooden chair near the pot-belly stove, and Lenny sat, grateful for the warmth, trying not to look as terrified as she felt. Because she was terrified, not of the mountains, not of the cold, not even of marrying a stranger. She was terrified of what was behind her. Lenny pressed her hands flat against the valise on her lap, felt the hard outline of the small Derringer pistol hidden in the lining. Still there. Good. She had stolen it from a dead man's coat pocket in a boarding house in St. Louis. She had walked 1,100 miles, taken 3 stagecoaches, changed her name twice, and ended up here, at the end of the world, because the world she came from wanted her back, and if it found her, she was dead. Prue set a tin cup of coffee in front of her, strong enough to strip paint. Drink. You look like a ghost in a party dress. Lenny almost smiled. Almost. The door banged open 40 minutes later. 3 men walked in. Not 1. 3. And the general store, which had felt reasonably sized a moment ago, suddenly felt very small. The first one through the door was massive, tall enough that he had to duck the frame, broad enough that his shoulders nearly touched both sides. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. Dark chestnut hair fell across his forehead. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to firelight. Amber, intense, and utterly unreadable. He wore a heavy buffalo hide coat, and his boots left clumps of frozen mud on Prue's clean floor. He stopped 2 steps inside the door. His gaze found Lenny immediately. Locked on, didn't waver. She felt it like a physical thing, like someone had pressed a hot coal against her sternum. Behind him came the second one, slightly shorter, but wider, built like a blacksmith, because he was one. She could see it in his hands, thick, scarred, stained with soot that never quite washed out. His jaw was square and set hard. His eyes were darker than the first man's, angrier. He looked at Lenny the way you look at a stray dog that wandered onto your porch. The third one was the youngest. She could tell by the way he moved, less deliberate, more open. His face had a gentleness the other 2 lacked. Same dark hair but lighter eyes, almost hazel. He carried a wool blanket draped over his arm, like he had thought ahead, like he had thought about her. The big one spoke first. Miss Cahill. Not a question either. This town didn't ask questions. It made statements and waited to see if you flinched. Mr. Drummond, Lenny said. She stood. Her knees were embarrassingly unsteady, but her voice was not. Everett, he said. Then he jerked his chin toward the blacksmith. Nash. And finally the young one. Perry, my brothers. Brothers. The word hit her like cold water. She looked from one face to another. Everett, Nash, Perry, 3 Drummond men. The letters had mentioned a cabin, a mountain, a life. They had not mentioned 3 men. Your letters, Lenny started. I wrote them, Perry said quietly. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. On Everett's behalf, he's not. Well, Perry glanced at his eldest brother. Words aren't his strongest suit. Everett's expression did not change. Not one muscle. He could have been carved from the same granite as the mountains outside. Nash, the middle one, didn't bother with introductions or explanations. He looked at Lenny's dress, her valise, her impractical leather boots, and he let out a sound that was half laugh and half disgust. She won't last a week. Nobody responded to that, which was worse than if someone had argued. Prue Gandy leaned against her counterarms folded, watching this disaster unfold with the calm satisfaction of someone who had predicted it. Well, Prue said, this should be interesting. The mule's name was Buckshot. Lenny learned this because Perry told her. Perry, she was quickly realizing, was the only Drummond brother who used words for anything other than orders. They loaded her valise onto the crossbuck saddle alongside sacks of flour, salt tins of coffee, and blocks of black powder wrapped in oilcloth. Everett checked every knot twice. Nash didn't help. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the sky like it owed him money. The cabin is 5 hours up, Everett said. Not to her specifically, to the air. You walk behind the mule, step where I step. The drifts hide the crevices. You wander off the trail. He paused. You fall. I won't climb down to get you. Lenny felt a cold spike of something in her chest. Fear or maybe anger. Hard to tell the difference anymore. I understand, she said. Perry held out the wool blanket. It gets colder higher up. A lot colder. She took it, wrapped it over her head and shoulders, pulling it tight until only her face showed. The fabric smelled like wood smoke and something faintly animal. She didn't care. It was warm. They set out. Everett led. His strides were long and mechanical. A man who had walked this trail 1,000 times and resented every step that wasn't his alone. Nash followed. Then Buckshot plodding along with the resigned patience of a mule who had seen too many winters. Perry walked beside Lenny for the first quarter mile, pointing out the footing, where the rocks were slick, where the ice hid under a thin skin of dirt. Then the trail narrowed, and it became single file, and there was nothing to do but follow the footprints of the man ahead and pray. The town of Sparrow Creek disappeared behind a wall of lodgepole pines within 20 minutes. After that, there was only the mountain. It rose above them like a living thing. Gray rock and black timber and snow that started at the tree line and didn't stop. The trail was a ribbon of packed earth that switchbacked up the slope in long grinding zigzags. Lenny walked. Her boots were wrong. She had known it when she bought them in St. Louis. Too thin, too smooth on the sole, made for wooden floors and cobblestone streets. Not this, not frozen mountain trails where one wrong step meant a broken ankle or worse. But she walked. She didn't ask to rest. She didn't ask them to slow down. She set her jaw and she matched their pace. And when her right boot slipped on a patch of ice and her knee hit the ground hard enough to send a jolt of pain up her entire leg, she got back up before anyone could turn around. Everett never looked back. But she noticed something. He was listening. She could tell by the slight tilt of his head, the way his shoulders would tense when she stumbled, the way they would relax just barely when he heard her get back up. He was testing her. Fine, she had been tested by worse. The light faded, the temperature dropped, and kept dropping. The cold up here wasn't like cold anywhere else Lenny had ever been. It wasn't the wet, miserable cold of East Coast winters. It was dry, absolute. A cold that crystallized the moisture inside her nose and turned each breath into a small cloud of white vapor that vanished the instant it left her lips. The trees began to pop and crack around them. The sound was sharp, violent, like gunshots. Perry noticed her flinch the first time it happened and spoke over his shoulder. "Sap freezing," he said. "The trees can't hold it when it gets this cold. They crack from the inside." Lenny nodded. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, or her toes. She curled them inside her useless boots and kept walking. 3 hours in, maybe 4. She had lost track. Her world had narrowed to the back of Buckshot's hindquarters, and the sound of her own breathing, and the mechanical rhythm of left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. Her thigh muscles were screaming. Her lungs burned in the thin altitude. But she didn't stop. She would die on this trail before she asked one of those men for help. Because asking for help was how it started. Every time. You asked for help, and then you owed something, and then you belonged to someone. Lenny Cahill did not belong to anyone. Not anymore, finally, a shape in the darkness. It emerged from the hillside like something the mountain had grown rather than something men had built. Low, heavy, more earth than timber. The roof was thick sod, already dusted with the first snow of the season. The walls were squared logs chinked with mud and moss. A lean-to structure jutted off the left side, sheltering a small corral where 2 horses stood with their heads low and their breath pluming white. Everett unlatched the heavy door, kicked away the ice at the sill, walked inside, struck a match. The sulfur flared bright and sharp, and then the warm yellow glow of a kerosene lantern pushed back the darkness. Lenny stood in the doorway. The cabin was one large room, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a long table with 3 chairs, a wash basin on a stand, provisions stacked on wooden pallets, pelts and hides piled against the far wall, a loft above accessible by a rough-hewn ladder where she could see the edges of bedrolls. And in the back right corner, a smaller space sectioned off by a heavy elk hide hung from the ceiling beam. "That's yours," Everett said. He pointed to the curtained space. "Bed, blankets. Don't come out after dark without making noise first. Instinct is to shoot first." Comforting. Nash shouldered past her through the door without a word. He began unloading the mule's packs with sharp, efficient movements. Perry followed gentler, carrying her valise inside and setting it near the elk hide curtain. "It's not much," Perry said, "but it's dry, and once that stove gets going, it's warm." Lenny stepped inside. The door closed behind her. The wind, that relentless screaming wind, went silent, cut off. And in its place came a stillness so complete she could hear the blood pulsing in her own ears. She was here, at the top of the world, with 3 men she didn't know, in a cabin she couldn't leave. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Lenny allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. It pressed down on her chest like a stone. Her eyes burned, her throat tightened. But she didn't cry. She had stopped crying the day Galt Redding burned his initial into her shoulder. That was 7 years ago, a lifetime, a different girl. Everett was already at the stove. Pine bark, shaved kindling, another sulfur match. The fire caught with a soft whoosh. The iron began to tick and ping as it warmed. Nash hung the provisions from ceiling hooks. Perry filled the coffee pot from a wooden bucket. Nobody spoke. And Lenny realized, standing there in her ruined red dress with melted snow pooling around her useless boots, that she had traded one kind of captivity for another. The question was whether this cage had teeth. The first night was the longest of her life. She lay behind the elk hide curtain on a narrow cot layered with wool blankets in a thick bearskin. The warmth from the stove barely reached her corner. She could hear everything. Nash's heavy breathing from the loft, Perry's occasional cough, and Everett. Everett didn't sleep. She knew because she didn't sleep either. And at 2 in the morning, when the fire had burned low and the cold crept back in, she heard him get up, heard his boots on the floorboards, heard him feed another log into the stove. The iron door creaked open, then closed. The fire hissed and crackled as it caught the new wood. Then nothing. He just sat there, in the dark, in the warmth of the stove, not sleeping. She recognized it. The vigilance of someone who had learned the hard way that bad things come at night. "What are you afraid of, Everett Drummond?" She turned over, pressed her face into the musty wool of the blanket, closed her eyes, and didn't sleep until the gray light of dawn seeped through the gaps in the chinking. Morning. She woke to the sound of an axe, sharp, rhythmic, coming from outside. She sat up. The cabin was empty. All 3 men were already gone. Lenny moved fast. She splashed icy water from the basin on her face, twisted her hair back, changed into the one plain cotton work dress she had packed. Dark blue, practical, not pretty. She was done being pretty. Pretty was a target. She found the coffee grinder on a shelf near the stove. A hand crank model, the wood worn smooth from years of use. The beans were in a tin canister nearby. She ground them fine, boiled water in the battered tin pot on the stovetop. The smell filled the cabin within minutes. Rich, bitter, familiar. The one good thing she could offer. She found the tin cups, 3 of them. She set them on the table. Then she paused, grabbed a 4th from a peg on the wall. Because she lived here now, whether they liked it or not. 4 cups, 4 saucers, 4 places at the table. The door opened. Everett came in with an armload of split wood. He dropped it beside the stove with a heavy crash, straightened up, stopped. He was looking at the table, at the 4 cups. Then he looked at her. Something moved behind those amber eyes. She couldn't read it. It was there and gone like a fish turning just below the surface of dark water. He walked to the table, picked up a cup, tested the heat against his palm, took a sip. He drank slowly, deliberately, as if measuring not just the coffee, but the woman who had made it. "It's strong," Lenny said. She heard the nervous edge in her own voice and hated it. Everett took another sip, set the cup down, looked at her. Obliged, he said. One word, but the way he said it, low, rough, like it had been dragged up from somewhere deep. That one word told her more than all of Perry's letters combined. It told her he hadn't tasted someone else's coffee in a long, long time, and that it meant more to him than he would ever say. Nash came through the door next. He looked at the cup waiting for him. He looked at Lenny. He picked it up without a word and walked to the far corner. But he drank it, every drop. Perry came last. He saw the 4 cups and smiled. A small, real smile. You didn't have to do that. I know, Lenny said. He sat down across from her. He liked it. Everett, I mean. He never says much, but when he says oblige, that's practically a standing ovation. Lenny wrapped her hands around her own cup. The warmth seeped into her frozen fingers. Why didn't the letters mention your brothers? Perry's smile faded. He looked down at his coffee. Because I was afraid you wouldn't come. You were right. Yeah. He nodded slowly. I usually am. That's what makes it so annoying. Lenny felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Almost a smile, but not yet. The days settled into a rhythm, not a comfortable one, more like the rhythm of a clock wound too tight. Every tick carrying tension, every talk loaded with unspoken questions. Lenny made herself useful. She had to. Nash's words from the first day burned in her like a coal she couldn't spit out. She won't last a week. So she set out to prove him wrong with the quiet, relentless determination that had kept her alive for the past 7 years. She cooked. She cleaned. She organized the provisions with an efficiency that surprised even Everett, who ran the cabin like a military outpost. She scrubbed the tin plates with sand and boiling water until they gleamed. She found herbs growing wild near the tree line. Yarrow, sage, dried them over the stove and stored them in small cloth pouches. Nash watched all of this from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't thank her. He didn't acknowledge her work. But she noticed that when she reorganized the firewood pile by size and type-stacking kindling separate from burn logs, he stopped rearranging it after her. That was progress, maybe. Everett was harder to read. He moved around her like she was a piece of furniture that had been placed in a room he hadn't rearranged in years. Careful, measured, never getting too close, never initiating conversation. But she caught him watching her. Quick glances when he thought she wasn't looking. Studying her hands when she worked. Her face when she thought no one could see. On the 4th day, she was kneading dough at the table when Nash walked in from the forge he had set up in the lean-to. He had a deep gash across his palm, a slip of the hammer. Blood ran freely between his fingers, dripping onto the floorboards. Perry jumped up from his chair. Nash, that needs stitching. It needs wrapping, Nash growled. Leave it. Lenny moved before she thought. She grabbed a clean rag from the wash basin, poured boiling water from the kettle into a bowl, and stepped in front of Nash. Sit down, she said. Nash looked at her like she had just slapped him. I don't need your help. I didn't ask what you need. I said sit down. Something in her voice. Something that came from a place deeper and darker than this mountain. A voice that had been forged in rooms where you either took control of the situation or the situation consumed you. Nash must have heard it because his mouth opened, then closed. Then he sat down on the wooden crate near the stove. Lenny took his hand, pulled his fingers apart, examined the cut. Deep, but clean. No debris. She washed it with the hot water. Nash hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. You need stitches, she said. I've had worse. I'm sure you have. You still need stitches. She threaded the bone needle with boiled horsehair. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. She stitched the wound with small, precise sutures, her fingers steady, her breathing even. When she was done, she tied it off, wrapped it in clean cloth, and stepped back. Nash flexed his hand, looked at the bandage, looked at her. Something had shifted in his eyes. Not friendliness, but the hostility had dimmed by a single degree. Where'd you learn that? Learn that, he asked. I've had worse too, Lenny said. She turned back to her dough. Conversation over. Everett, standing in the shadow near the door where he had watched the entire thing, said nothing. But that night when Lenny went to her corner, she found a second blanket folded neatly on her cot. The thick wool kind. The warm kind. Nobody mentioned it in the morning. On the sixth night, Lenny waited. She waited until the cabin was dark, until Nash's snoring drifted down from the loft in a steady rhythm, until Perry's restless turning settled, until Everett's breathing suggested something close to sleep, though she doubted he ever truly surrendered to it. Then she moved, silently. Years of practice. Galt Redding's compound had taught her how to move through a dark room without making a sound, where to place her weight, how to distribute each step across the ball of her foot, how to breathe without the air catching in her throat. She reached her valise, opened the clasps with two soft clicks, slid her hand inside the lining, found the seam she had re-sewn in St. Louis, pulled it apart. The Derringer was small, 2 barrels, nickel-plated. It fit in her palm like it was made for it. She checked the loads, both chambers full. She slid it back into the lining. Then she reached deeper. The notebook, small, leather-bound, filled with columns of numbers and initials, written in a code that looked like random arithmetic to anyone who didn't know the key. But Lenny knew the key, because she had invented it. These pages contained every transaction Galt Redding had made in the past 3 years, every miner bought and sold, every bribe paid to every lawman from Colorado to Nevada, every body buried in every unmarked grave near every illegal mine shaft he operated. This notebook was her death warrant and her life insurance. As long as she had it, she had leverage. The moment she lost it, she had nothing. She pressed it against her chest for a moment, then tucked it back inside the lining, sealed the seam, closed the valise. When she lay back down, her heart was hammering so loudly she was certain someone must hear it. But the cabin stayed dark. The wind howled, the stove ticked, and Lenny Cahill lay in the darkness of a stranger's home, clutching a blanket that smelled of wood smoke, wondering how long she could keep running before the past caught up. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that 20 feet away, Everett Drummond lay perfectly still on his bedroll with his eyes wide open. He had heard every sound, the clasps, the lining, the small metallic click of a weapon being checked. He didn't move. He didn't confront her. He just added it to the list of things about Lenny Cahill that didn't add up. The mail-order bride who stitched wounds without flinching, who organized provisions like someone accustomed to managing inventory, who flinched when a man raised his hand to scratch his own head, who carried a gun hidden in her luggage. Who are you, Lenny Cahill? The answer would come, but not tonight. The first real snow arrived on the 9th day. Not the gentle flurries that had been dusting the peaks. Real snow, the kind that fell thick and heavy and relentless, like the sky had simply opened up and decided to bury everything beneath it. By afternoon, the trail to Sparrow Creek was gone, just gone, swallowed by 3 feet of powder. Nash stood on the porch and stared at the white wall that had replaced the world. That's it. Pass is closed. Perry came up beside him. Early this year. Yeah. Lenny stood in the doorway behind them. She looked at the snow, at the mountains that now formed an impassable barrier between her and the rest of civilization. Between her and Galt Redding, she should have felt trapped. Instead, for the first time in 7 years, she felt something almost like safe. Almost. Everett was already in motion. He had prepared for this the way he prepared for everything, methodically, without wasted movement. He hauled extra firewood from the lean-to, checked the provisions, counted the tins of coffee, the sacks of flour, the blocks of salt pork. He made calculations in his head. Lenny could see his lips moving slightly as he worked. "We have enough to last through March," he announced, "if we supplement with game." He looked at Lenny when he said it, and she realized it was the first time he had included her in a practical assessment of their situation. Not as a guest, not as a burden, as a factor in the equation of their survival. She met his gaze. I can help set snares if someone shows me the runs. Nash scoffed. Everett didn't react. Perry said, I'll show you. The following morning, Perry led her along the tree line. He showed her the rabbit tracks, the patterns, the places where the animals moved between the cover of the pines and the open snow to feed on bark. He showed her how to set a wire snare, the loop, the trigger stick, the anchor. Lenny listened carefully. She already knew most of it, but she let him teach her, because some knowledge is better received as a gift than revealed as a secret. 2 days later, she brought in her first rabbit. Frozen stiff, she laid it on the table. Needs skinning, Skinning, she said, mimicking Everett's communication style. Short, direct, no extra words. She intended to wait for one of the brothers to handle it. But then she thought, no, this is the moment. She picked up the hunting knife from the table. She held the rabbit by the hind legs, and she worked. Swift, precise. She made the incision around the hocks, sliced down the inside of each leg, began peeling the hide downward like removing a glove. Her hands moved with a fluid, mechanical grace that came not from Perry's lesson 2 days ago, but from years of practice she had never mentioned. She didn't hack. She didn't tear. She found the joints with the tip of the blade separating bone from sinew effortlessly. In under 3 minutes, the meat was dressed and the hide was stretched flat on the table. She wiped the blade, set it down carefully, stepped back. The cabin was silent. All three brothers were staring at her. Nash had stopped mid-motion, a piece of firewood suspended in his hand. Perry's mouth was slightly open. And Everett. Everett was looking at her hands, at the knife, at the perfectly dressed carcass. And something had changed in his amber eyes. A new kind of attention. Sharper, deeper. That wasn't a skill learned in 2 days. That was years. That was survival. Where'd you learn to work a blade like that? Nash asked. His voice was different. The mockery was gone, replaced by something more cautious. Lenny looked at her hands, red and chapped from the cold. She walked back to the stove, sat on her crate, pulled her shawl over her shoulders. She didn't answer, and nobody pushed it. But that evening, after the stew was made and eaten, and the tin plates were washed and the stove was banked for the night, Everett lingered at the table. He was sharpening a blade with long, slow strokes of a whetstone. When Lenny passed him on her way to bed, he spoke without looking up. The dough you make, he said, you measure with your hands, not a cup. Same way the provisioners do at the forts, military kitchens. Lenny stopped walking. Her back was to him. She could feel his eyes on her shoulder blades. And you stitch wounds like a field surgeon. And you skin a rabbit like someone who fed an army. Or a camp. Her blood ran cold. Not from the weather. I grew up poor, she said. You learn fast when you're hungry. A long pause. The scrape of the whetstone continued. Then it stopped. Yeah, Everett said. I reckon you do. She walked behind her curtain, sat on the cot, pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. He was watching her. Not the way Nash watched, looking for reasons to distrust. Not the way Perry watched, looking for reasons to hope. Everett watched the way a hunter watches a trail. Patient, reading the signs, assembling a picture from broken branches and bent grass, and he was getting close. Later that week, Everett went down the mountain alone. The trail was buried, but he knew alternate routes, switchbacks through the timber that added 2 hours, but avoided the worst drifts. He needed salt. They were running low, and Nash's forge consumed charcoal faster than planned. In Sparrow Creek, he loaded the mule at Prue Gandy's store. He counted out coins. Prue weighed the salt. And then, as she always did, Prue leaned across the counter. Your girl's settling in. She's not my girl. She's living in your cabin, eating your food and making your coffee. In Sparrow Creek, that's as good as married. Prue wrapped the salt in oilcloth. Listen, something you should know. A man came through here 3 days after your girl arrived. Well-dressed, city clothes, asked about a young woman with light hair traveling west on the stage line, said she was a runaway ward, said her family was worried. Everett's hands went still on the counter. He didn't give a name, but he had hard eyes, Everett, the kind that don't match the polite words coming out of the mouth. What did you tell him? I told him the stage doesn't stop here anymore. Told him the line rerouted south through Dawson. He believed me, or he pretended to. Prue pushed the salt across the counter. He went south, but men like that have a way of circling back. Everett picked up the salt, picked up his coat. At the door he stopped. If anyone else comes asking, you never saw her. Prue nodded. Never saw who? Exactly. Everett made the climb back in silence. The weight of the salt on Buckshot's back was nothing compared to the weight of what Prue had told him. Someone was looking for Lenny Cahill. Someone with city clothes and hard eyes and a story about a runaway ward that Everett didn't believe for a single second. Because wards don't hide guns in their luggage, and worried families don't send men with eyes like that. He reached the cabin at dusk, pushed through the door. The stove was hot. The room smelled like coffee and fresh bread. Lenny was at the table teaching Perry a card game with a worn deck she had found in the provisions. She looked up when Everett walked in, smiled, a small tentative thing, like a match struck in a room where smiles had been extinguished a long time ago. Everett set down the salt, hung his coat, walked to the table, poured himself coffee from the pot she kept warm. He looked at her across the rim of the cup. She looked back, her blue eyes, that cornflower blue that seemed too bright for a place this gray. Everything all right in town? Perry asked. Fine, Everett said. He drank his coffee. He said nothing about Prue's warning, nothing about the well-dressed man with the hard eyes. But later that night, after the lantern was blown out, Everett reached beneath his bedroll. His fingers found the grip of his Colt revolver. He pulled it close, not pointed at Lenny's curtain, never at her, but ready, because whatever was coming for Lenny Cahill was now coming for all of them. And Everett Drummond had lost enough in one lifetime. He would not lose whatever fragile, unnamed thing was beginning to take root in this cabin. The stove ticked, the wind screamed, the snow fell, and up on the mountain 4 people who had each been alone in their own way were becoming something none of them had intended. A unit, a household, a perimeter, not yet a family. That word was still too heavy, too dangerous, but something that hadn't existed a week ago. Something worth keeping the fire lit for. And outside, somewhere beyond the frozen pass and the buried trail and the mountains that stood like sentinels against the dark sky, a man in city clothes was asking questions, following a trail of stagecoach tickets and false names, getting closer. Because Galt Redding did not lose property. And Lenny Cahill, with her coated notebook and her hidden derringer and her cornflower blue eyes, was the most valuable property he had ever owned. The snow kept falling. The fire kept burning. And the first winter of their lives together had only just begun. December ate the mountain alive. The snow didn't fall anymore. It attacked, sideways, horizontal, driven by a wind that howled down from the peaks with a sound like something dying. The drifts climbed past the cabin windows, past the lean-to roof, past the fence posts Everett had driven 8 feet deep the previous summer. The world outside became a featureless white void. No horizon, no landmarks, no way out. And inside the cabin, 4 people learned what it meant to survive in a space smaller than a church pew. The routine saved them, or maybe trapped them. Hard to tell the difference. Everett woke before dawn every day. He fed the stove, checked the provisions, went out to break ice on the creek for water, came back with frost in his beard and red welts on his hands from the axe handle. Nash worked the forge in the lean-to, horseshoes, trap springs, nails. The ring of his hammer was the heartbeat of the cabin, steady, relentless, angry in a way that had nothing to do with metal. Perry tended the snare lines. He left at first light and came back by mid-morning with whatever the mountain offered. Rabbits mostly. Once a grouse, once nothing at all. And Lenny. Lenny did everything else. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended, she organized, She dried herbs over the stove and ground coffee every morning and kept the sourdough starter alive in a clay crock near the warm pipe. She patched holes in the chinking when the wind found them. She scrubbed, she hauled, she worked without being asked and without being thanked. Because that was the deal, unspoken but absolute. You earn your keep or you freeze. Lenny earned it. The rhythm of the cross-cut saw became the sound of their days. When firewood ran low, which happened constantly because the stove was a hungry iron beast that consumed logs the way Nash consumed coffee, Everett would find a standing dead pine, and they would all go out. It was on one of these days, mid-December, the temperature so far below zero that the mercury in Everett's old thermometer had retreated to the bottom of the glass and simply given up. Lenny learned something about the Drummond brothers. They worked like a single animal. Everett and Nash took opposite ends of the crosscut saw. The blade was 6 feet of sharpened steel. It required perfect synchronization. Pull too hard on one side and the saw binds. Push too soon and the teeth skip. The two brothers moved without speaking, without signaling. Their bodies rocked in matched rhythm breath, smoking arms pumping the steel, singing through the frozen wood. Perry worked the fallen timber, trimming branches, stacking rounds, moving with an efficiency that compensated for his smaller frame. Lenny hauled. She dragged the trimmed rounds onto a canvas tarp and pulled them back toward the cabin. The work was brutal. The snow was waist-deep in places. Each load felt heavier than the last. Her shoulders burned. Her back screamed. Her hands wrapped in strips of cloth because she had no gloves were cracked and bleeding. She didn't stop. On the third trip back, she lost her footing on a buried root. Went down hard. The rounds scattered off the tarp. She landed face first in the snow. The cold hit her like a slap, like a fist. She lay there for a second, just 1 second, feeling the snow melt against her burning cheeks. Get up. She got up, reloaded the tarp, kept pulling. She didn't see Everett watching her from the ridge, but he was. He had stopped sawing. Nash was cursing at him to keep the rhythm. But Everett was watching the woman in the blue cotton dress drag 100 pounds of timber through waist-deep snow with bleeding hands and a jaw set like stone. That evening, he did something he had never done in a decade of living on this mountain. He gave something away. They were stacking the last of the split wood beside the stove. Lenny's hands were shaking, not from cold, from exhaustion, from the deep bone-level fatigue of a body pushed past its design specifications. Her cloth wrappings were soaked through and stained with blood from the cracks in her knuckles. Everett pulled off his heavy buckskin mittens, the ones lined with rabbit fur, warm and dry and worth more on this mountain than silver. He held them out to her. Lenny looked at the mittens, then at him, and he saw it flash through her pale blue eyes. Suspicion, calculation, the instinctive arithmetic of a woman who had learned that gifts always cost more than they appeared to. In her world, nothing was free. Everything was a transaction. Every kindness came with a hidden invoice. Take them, Everett said. Frostbite takes fingers. You lose your fingers, you're dead weight. There it was, not kindness, pragmatism. He had framed it as survival math because he knew, somehow he knew, that she couldn't accept a gift. But she could accept a logical argument. She reached out slowly, took the mittens, slid her hands inside. They were enormous on her. The rabbit fur lining enveloped her fingers like a warm bath. She felt the heat seep into her cracked skin, and something loosened in her chest. Something she couldn't name and didn't trust. She didn't say thank you. She just picked up the saw handle with her oversized mittened hands and looked at him. Ready to work. Something shifted in Everett's face. Not a smile, not quite. But the granite softened for half a second, like sun hitting a frozen cliff just long enough to make it glisten, and then it was gone. But Perry saw it from across the woodpile, and Perry's eyes went wide, because Perry had not seen his eldest brother's face do anything resembling warmth in 5 years. Something was changing on this mountain, slowly, invisibly, like the first crack in a frozen river that you can't see but can feel humming beneath your boots. The nightmare came on December 23rd. Lenny knew that because Perry had been marking the days on a piece of pine board nailed to the wall, scratching a line for each one with his knife. He had mentioned Christmas was coming. Nash had grunted something about Christmas being a waste of good firewood. Everett had said nothing, as usual. Lenny had gone to bed that night feeling something unfamiliar. Settled. The cabin was warm. Her stomach was full. The mittens hung drying near the stove, and she knew they would be there in the morning. Small certainties, the building blocks of something she hadn't had in 7 years. Peace. And then her father sold her again. In the dream, she was 14. Small. So small. Standing in a room that smelled like cigar smoke and lamp oil. Her father's hand on her shoulder, pushing her forward, toward a man sitting behind a mahogany desk. The man had a face like a closed door, gray eyes, gray hair, a gray suit that cost more than everything Lenny's family owned combined. Galt Redding. In the dream, his voice was calm, reasonable, like a banker approving a loan. She'll do. The debt is settled. And then the brand, the iron coming out of the fire, cherry red, the shape of the letter R, his hands holding her down. The sound she made when the metal touched skin. A sound that wasn't a scream because his hand was over her mouth. A sound that lived in her throat for 7 years, trying to get out. She thrashed. In the cabin, in the dark, on the narrow cot behind the elk-hide curtain. She thrashed and kicked and fought the bare skin that had become Redding's arms and the blanket that had become his hand over her mouth. She didn't scream. That was the thing that would haunt Perry for the rest of his life. She fought in absolute silence, violently, desperately, without making a sound, because she had been trained that sound brought punishment. Perry heard the rustling. He climbed down from the loft, crossed the dark cabin. "Lenny!" He reached through the curtain. "Lenny, wake up!" His hand touched her shoulder. She detonated. Her fist caught him under the jaw. A sharp, precise strike. Not a panicked flail. A targeted blow. Perry's head snapped back. Before he could recover, she had twisted, bringing her knee into his ribs, her hand scrambling for the knife she kept under her pillow, which wasn't there, because Everett had moved it 3 days ago. Quietly. Without telling her, without telling anyone. Perry grabbed her wrists. "Lenny, it's Perry. It's a dream. You're safe." She froze, her chest heaving, her eyes wide and white in the darkness, staring at nothing, staring at everything. The past and present layered on top of each other like two transparencies held to the same light. Then the present won. She saw the cabin ceiling, the orange glow of the stove coals. Perry's face, young and frightened and bleeding from a split lip. She went limp. "Let me go." A whisper, barely human. Perry released her instantly, stepped back, rubbed his jaw. Everett was standing 3 feet away. She hadn't heard him move. He was just there, like he had materialized from the shadow itself. His revolver was in his hand but pointed at the floor. Nash was on the ladder halfway down from the loft, frozen in place. Lenny sat up, pulled the bearskin tight around her shoulders. Her hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. And as she gathered the fabric, the collar of her cotton dress pulled sideways. The brand burned deep into the pale skin of her left shoulder. The letter R, enclosed in a circle. The scar tissue was old but unmistakable. Raised and ridged in a slightly different color from the skin around it. Not an accident, not a burn from a cook stove. A deliberate mark, the way a rancher marks cattle, the way a man marks property. Everett saw it, his amber eyes locked onto the scar, locked, held, and something moved across his face that Lenny had never seen there before. Something that burned hotter than the iron that had made the mark. Rage. Not at her, for her. She felt his gaze on the brand and her hand flew up, jerked the fabric back into place, covering it, hiding it. Her eyes met his, and in them was a defiance so fierce and so fragile that it hurt to look at. "Don't you dare pity me." Everett holstered the revolver. He turned, walked to the stove, fed a log into the coals. The fire caught, grew, pushed warm light into the dark corners of the cabin. He didn't look at her again that night, but the next morning when the gray light seeped in and Lenny emerged from behind her curtain with her eyes hollow and her shoulders rigid, Everett was sitting at the table, alone, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He had made it himself, the first time since she arrived. He pushed 1 cup toward the empty chair across from him. Lenny sat. She thought about the knife, the one that should have been under her pillow and wasn't. She looked at Everett's hands around his own cup. Large, calloused, careful. He had taken it. She was certain, not to disarm her, to protect her from herself in the dark. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. They drank in silence. The stove crackled. The wind moaned. And then Everett set his cup down and looked at her. "When you're ready to tell it," he said, "I'll listen." 7 words. That was all. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He didn't ask what the R stood for, or who had put it there, or what she was running from. He just planted a flag in the frozen ground between them and said, "Whenever you're ready, the door's open." Lenny wrapped both hands around her cup. The warmth, the steadiness of the tin, the smell of the coffee she hadn't made, but someone had made for her. She nodded. Once. And that was enough. Christmas came and went without ceremony. Perry carved a small star from a piece of pine and set it on the table. Lenny made a dried berry cake with the last of the sugar. Nash complained about the waste of provisions, then ate 3 pieces. January arrived like a hammer. The cold intensified beyond anything Lenny had imagined possible. The air itself became hostile. Each breath was a negotiation with an atmosphere that wanted to freeze the moisture in your lungs. The snow didn't fall anymore because the sky had nothing left to give. Instead, the wind took what was already on the ground and weaponized it, scouring the ridges, carving the drifts into hard, icy waves with edges sharp enough to cut skin. The cabin shrank, not physically, but psychologically. The walls closed in, the ceiling dropped lower. 4 people in a single room day after day with nowhere to go and nothing to look at but each other. Tempers frayed. Nash and Everett argued about the firewood consumption. Perry and Nash argued about the snare lines. Nash argued with the stove, the coffee pot, the door latch, and once memorably with Buckshot, the mule who had the audacity to sneeze on Nash's freshly repaired bridle. But Nash never argued with Lenny. Not since the stitches, not since the rabbit. Something had shifted in his estimation of her. He still didn't trust her, but he respected her. And for Nash Drummond, respect came harder than trust. It was Lenny who noticed something else about Nash, something the other brothers either couldn't see or chose not to. He was in pain, not physical, or not just physical. Nash carried something in his chest the way you carry a stone in your boot. Always there, always grinding. She saw it in the way he attacked the anvil, the way his hammer fell harder than it needed to, the way he sometimes stopped mid-strike and stared at the wall with empty eyes. She recognized it because she carried the same stone. On the 4th day of January, the stranger came. The knock was wrong. That was the first thing. Nobody knocked on this cabin door. The brothers just walked in, and nobody else existed up here. Nobody should exist up here. The pass was buried under 8 feet of snow. The temperature was 20 below. No sane person was walking these mountains. 3 knocks, heavy, desperate. Everett was on his feet before the sound finished, revolver drawn. Nash came down from the loft with a shotgun. Perry moved to the window, pulling the hide curtain aside just enough to see. "One man," Perry said. "Alone, on foot. He's half dead." Everett unlatched the door. The man who stumbled in was tall, gaunt. His face was windburned to raw meat. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He wore a miner's heavy coat, but his boots were all wrong. Too new, too clean. City boots. The kind a man buys when he's pretending to be something he's not. Lost, the man gasped. He collapsed near the stove. Got separated from my outfit. Been walking for 2 days. Everett looked at Nash. Nash looked at Perry. A silent conversation in 3 glances. Perry brought water. Nash brought a blanket. Everett kept the revolver visible but not aimed. The man's name was Pruitt, he said. A prospector, he said. Looking for a claim in the high valleys, he said. Lenny stood near the back wall. She hadn't moved since the knock, hadn't breathed, because she recognized the boots. She had seen those exact boots, that exact brand, Italian leather with brass eyelets. She had seen 6 pairs of them in Galt Redding's supply closet, because Redding outfitted his men well, gave them everything they needed. Boots, guns, horses, instructions. Pruitt wasn't lost. Pruitt was hunting. She didn't say a word. She sat on her crate. She sewed a patch on Nash's torn shirt. She served stew when Everett told her to feed their guest. She moved through the evening like a shadow, quiet, invisible, exactly the way she had moved through Redding's compound for 7 years. But her mind was a storm. He found me. How? The pass is closed. He must have come from the South Ridge, through the high timber. That's a death trail in winter, which means Redding paid him enough to risk it, which means I'm worth more than I thought, which means he's not going to stop. Pruitt ate the stew, thanked them, said kind things about the cabin, asked casual questions. How long had they lived up here? Did they get many visitors? Was it just the 3 of them? Just the 3 of us, Everett said. I didn't look at Lanny, didn't include her, and she understood. He was hiding her in plain sight, making Pruitt see a servant girl, a nobody, not worth mentioning. Smart man Everett Drummond. But Pruitt's eyes found her anyway, and lingered. Just a fraction too long, just enough to confirm what she already knew. He knows exactly who I am. Night fell. Pruitt was given a bedroll near the stove. The brothers went to their usual places. Lenny went behind her curtain. The cabin went dark. Lenny lay still, eyes open, counting heartbeats. 100, 200. The stove ticked. Nash snored. Perry breathed. Everett was silent, which meant he was awake. 500, 600. A sound, small, careful. The rustle of canvas as Pruitt shifted on his bedroll. Then the soft creak of a floorboard. Then another, moving toward the door. Lenny rolled off her cot, soundless. She reached into her valise, found the Derringer in the lining. 2 shots. That was all she would get. She slipped behind the elk hide curtain. The cabin was dark, save for the dull red glow from the stove grate. She could see Pruitt's silhouette at the door. He was lifting the latch, slowly, inch by inch. He wasn't running. He was going to the lean-to, going for the mule, going to ride down the mountain and tell Redding exactly where she was. Lenny crossed the cabin in 6 steps, through the door, into the night. The cold hit her like a wall of knives. She was barefoot, wearing only her cotton shift. The snow burned her feet, but she kept moving, around the corner, to the lean-to. Pruitt was there. He had a bridle in his hands. Buckshot was snorting, pulling against the halter, sensing something wrong. Put it down, Lenny said. Pruitt spun. His hand went to his coat. A gun. She had expected that. I know who sent you, she said. Her voice was steady, dead steady, the voice of a woman who had long ago separated fear from function. And I know what you are. Pruitt's face changed. The pretense fell away like a mask hitting the floor. What was underneath was cold, professional, unimpressed. Miss Cahill, he almost smiled. Mr. Redding sends his regards. Tell him yourself. She raised the Derringer. Pruitt drew, fast but not fast enough. The Derringer barked, a sharp crack that echoed off the mountain like breaking ice. The ball caught Pruitt in the right shoulder. He spun, His own shot went wild, punching a hole in the lean-to roof. He staggered, grabbed the fence rail, looked at her with genuine surprise, and then he ran, bleeding into the snow, stumbling through the drifts, into the trees, into the dark. Gone. Lenny stood in the lean-to, barefoot in the snow, the derringer smoking in her hand, her shift soaked with melted snow, shaking, not from cold, from the knowledge that it had begun. The door of the cabin slammed open. Everett came out first, revolver drawn, eyes scanning, Nash behind him with a shotgun, Perry with a lantern. They found her standing in the bloody snow, holding a gun they didn't know she had, looking at the trail of dark spots leading into the timber. Everett looked at this blood, at the gun, at her. Inside, he said, "Now." She went. They sat at the table, all four of them, the lantern between them, the fire rebuilt and roaring because Perry had stoked it to a blaze, while Everett wrapped Lenny's frozen feet in warm cloth, and Nash bolted the door and checked every window. And then silence, the kind that demands to be filled. Lenny looked at the three faces across from her. Everett, calm and still as granite. Nash, jaw tight, arms crossed, angry, but not at her, not entirely, at the situation, at the violation of their sanctuary. Perry, pale, worried. His split lip from the nightmare fully healed now, but a new bruise forming under his concern. "His name isn't Pruitt," Lenny said. "I don't know his real name, but he works for a man named Galt Redding." "Who is Galt Redding?" Perry asked. Lenny closed her eyes, opened them, looked at the table. "When I was 15, my father owed a debt. Gambling. He couldn't pay, so he paid with me." The words fell like stones into still water. Redding is a businessman, on the surface. He owns claims, trading posts, a freight company in Denver. But underneath all of that, he runs labor camps, illegal mines on stolen land. He buys workers, drifters, immigrants, people nobody misses. He works them until they drop, and then he buries them. Nash leaned forward. "He bought you. He owned me. He branded me." She touched her left shoulder, didn't pull the fabric aside, didn't need to. They had all seen it. The R stands for Redding. He marks everyone who belongs to him. Perry's face had gone white. 7 years. 7 years. He didn't make me work the mines. I can read. I can write. I can do arithmetic. So he made me his bookkeeper. I recorded every transaction, every purchase, every body. She paused. "I know where every mine is. I know who he bribes. I know how much. I know the names of the men he's buried." She looked at Everett, directly, without flinching. "I wrote it all down, in code, in a notebook I keep in my valise. That notebook can destroy him, and he knows it." Everett's expression hadn't changed. Not once. But his eyes. Something in those amber eyes had shifted. The calculation was still there. The hunter's assessment. But beneath it now burned something else. Recognition. He was looking at a survivor, and he knew exactly what that word cost. "How did you get out?" Everett asked. "I set a fire in the records building. While everyone was fighting the blaze, I walked out the front gate. I took a horse. I rode it until it dropped. Then I walked. The girl who left that compound had a different name. I buried her in St. Louis, changed it again in Kansas City. By the time I found your advertisement in a newspaper in Omaha, I was Lenny Cahill. And Lenny Cahill had no past." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "I didn't come here looking for a husband. I came here looking for a place to disappear." The silence that followed was absolute. The stove ticked, the wind screamed, and three brothers sat with the truth like a hot coal dropped in their laps. Nash was the first to speak. "No." One word, hard as the anvil he worked. "Nash," Perry started. "No." Nash stood, the chair scraped back. "She brought a killer to our door, in our home, while we slept. Our home, while we slept. He pointed at Lenny. You put us all at risk. Every day you've been here, every cup of coffee, every smile, every stitch in my hand, all of it was a lie. Nash, Everett's voice, low, warning. Don't, Nash snapped. He turned on his brother. Don't protect her. She's not Martha. She's not your dead wife come back in a red dress. She's a stranger who used us as a hiding place. The words hit Everett like a physical blow. Lenny saw it, the way his shoulders tightened, the way his jaw locked, the way the amber in his eyes went cold and dark. That's enough, Everett said, barely above a whisper, which was worse than shouting. It's not enough. It won't be enough until she's gone, and that maniac stops looking for her in our cabin. Nash grabbed his coat from the peg, his hat, his gloves. I won't stay under the same roof. Nash, Perry was on his feet. It's 20 below. The wind is. I know what the wind is. Nash threw open the door. The cold blasted in. The fire flickered. The lantern flame danced wildly. He walked out into the howling dark. The door slammed behind him. Perry started for the door. Everett caught his arm. Let him go. Perry's voice cracked. He'll freeze. He'll make the lean-to. He's angry, not stupid. But Everett was staring at the door, and Lenny could see the doubt, the fear, because the line between angry and stupid on a night like this was thinner than the ice on the creek. Lenny stood. This is my fault. Sit down, Everett said. If I leave in the morning, if I go back down the mountain. And go where? His voice was sharp now. The pass is closed. The trail is buried. That man you shot is somewhere in the timber bleeding and desperate. You step outside this cabin alone, you die, one way or another. He was right. She knew he was right, which made it worse. Everett. She said his name, the first time she had used it like that, not as an address, as an appeal. Nash is right, I should have told you. Yes, you should have. He met her eyes. But you're here now, and the truth is on the table. We deal with what's in front of us. That's how this mountain works. He turned to Perry. Put the coffee on. It's going to be a long night. Perry put the coffee on, and they waited. 1 hour, 2. The wind screamed. The temperature dropped further. Lenny sat at the table with her hands around her cup, staring at the door, listening for the sound of Nash's boots on the porch. Nothing. At the 3-hour mark, Everett stood. He pulled on his heavy coat, grabbed the lantern, looked at Perry. Stay here. I'm coming, Perry said. Someone stays with her. Everett nodded toward Lenny. Someone guards the cabin. I'm coming, Lenny said. She was already lacing her boots, already wrapping herself in blankets. I can track in snow. I know how to read a trail. You can barely stand. Neither could Nash when he walked out. I'm coming. Everett stared at her. The calculation again. The assessment. Then something that might have been respect. Fine. Perry, bar the door behind us. Don't open it for anyone but us. They went out. The cold was unspeakable. It wasn't a temperature. It was an assault. The wind drove ice crystals into their faces like tiny needles. The lantern guttered and nearly died twice before Everett shielded it with his body. Nash's tracks led from the cabin toward the lean-to, then past it, out onto the open ridge, away from shelter, into the full fury of the storm, angry and stupid after all. They followed the tracks, Everett in front breaking trail, Lenny behind the heavy blanket over her head, the Derringer reloaded and tucked in her coat pocket, because a wounded man was somewhere in these trees, and desperation made men dangerous. The tracks led along the ridge for a quarter mile, then down, into a ravine Lenny hadn't seen before. A narrow slash in the rock face choked with snow and deadfall. Everett raised the lantern. The light caught something, color against the white. Nash. I was at the bottom of the ravine, 15 feet down. His leg was twisted under him at an angle that made Lenny's stomach lurch. He was conscious, barely. His face was gray, His lips were blue. He had stopped shivering, which was worse, which meant his body was giving up the fight. Nash Everett dropped to his knees at the edge. Nash's eyes opened, unfocused, lost. Stepped wrong. Ice under the snow. His voice was a thin rasp. Legs broke. Everett looked at the ravine walls, steep, icy, a straight drop. He started to lower himself over the edge. Lenny grabbed his arm. You go down there and you can't carry him up alone, not with that incline. Then what do you suggest? Rope. The mule, I'll go down. I'm lighter. I can stabilize the leg. You lower the rope and we haul him out. Everett looked at her, at the ravine, at his brother turning blue at the bottom. Go, he said. I'll get Buckshot. I was gone, running through the snow, faster than she had ever seen him move, which told her everything she needed to know about how scared he was. Lenny thought of Prue Gandy down in Sparrow Creek, the woman who had lied to a stranger to protect a girl she barely knew. The only person in this territory besides these three brothers who had chosen to stand between Lenny and the men hunting her. If Lenny died on this mountain tonight, Prue would never know why. And that thought strangely was what made her move. She half climbed, half slid down the ravine wall. The ice scraped her palms raw even through the mittens. She landed hard beside Nash. He was shaking, or trying to shake. His body was running out of fuel. Can you hear me? She pulled the blankets off her own shoulders and wrapped them around him. The cold hit her exposed body like a hammer, but she didn't care. She didn't have time to care. You shouldn't be here, Nash mumbled. I said terrible things. Yes, you did. Now hold still. She examined his leg by feel. The break was below the knee. She could feel the displacement through the heavy fabric of his trousers. Not a compound fracture, thank God, but bad enough. She grabbed 2 pieces of dead wood from the ravine floor. Straight, solid. She tore strips from the hem of her dress, working fast. Her fingers were already going numb. She braced the splints against Nash's shin and bound them tight. He made a sound through his teeth, low and guttural, but he didn't scream. Don't move this leg. Don't try to stand. When Everett drops the rope, I'm going to tie it under your arms. Lenny. What? Nash looked at her. His dark eyes were bright with pain and hypothermia and something else. Something that looked a lot like shame. I'm sorry. 2 words, quiet enough that the wind almost stole them. But she heard, and she stopped moving for just a second. Let the words land. Let them mean what they meant. I know, she said. Now shut up and stay warm. The rope came down. Everett had worked fast. Lenny tied it under Nash's arms in a bowline knot. Then she climbed, hand over hand, feet braced against the icy wall, every muscle screaming. She reached the top, grabbed Buckshot's halter, and together she and Everett pulled Nash up the ravine wall while the wind howled and the rope creaked and Nash gritted his teeth against a pain that must have been blinding. They got him to the cabin. Perry had the door open and the stove blazing. They laid Nash on the table, not gentle. There was nothing gentle about survival. Lenny cut his trouser leg open with a knife. The break was clean. She said it by feel. Nash passed out, which was a mercy. She bound it tight between the splints, applied a hot compress of yarrow leaves to draw the swelling, wrapped it in the last of their clean linen. Then she brewed willow bark tea, strong enough to choke on. And when Nash came to shaking and gray-faced, she held the cup to his lips and made him drink. Tastes like death, Nash croaked. It'll keep the fever down. Drink all of it. He drank. He looked at her over the rim of the cup, and the last wall between Nash Drummond and Lenny Cahill crumbled like wet chinking in a spring thaw. She sat by his side through the night, changed the compress every hour, checked the binding, monitored his breathing, kept the tea coming. Perry fell asleep in the chair around 2 in the morning. Even Everett finally surrendered to exhaustion near dawn, his chin dropping to his chest as he sat on the crate near the stove. But Lenny stayed awake, because she had kept vigil before, in darker rooms, for worse reasons. And this time, for the first time, she was keeping someone alive instead of watching someone die. Nash recovered slowly. The leg would take weeks to fully heal. He was confined to the cabin, to the table, to the cot they built for him near the stove because the loft ladder was impossible with a splinted leg. Being unable to work was harder on Nash than the break itself. I was insufferable for the first 3 days, barking orders, criticizing how Perry stacked the firewood, telling Lenny the stew needed more salt, complaining that the tea was too bitter, then complaining it was too weak. Lenny let him complain. She understood. Helplessness was its own kind of prison. And Nash, like her, had been in a prison before, even if he hadn't told her yet. On the 5th day of his recovery, the story came. It was evening. Perry had gone to check the snare lines before full dark. Everett was outside breaking ice on the creek. Lenny was grinding herbs at the table. Nash was lying on his cot, staring at the ceiling. "Our father was a good man," Nash said. No preamble, no warning, just words falling out of a wound that had been closed too long. That's what we were told. What Everett believed. What I believed. Lenny stopped grinding. She didn't look at him. Sometimes the best way to receive a confession is to pretend you're not listening. He built this cabin, ran a trap line, raised 3 boys after our mother died, worked harder than any man on this mountain, and he died owing a debt to a man he never told us about. Lenny's hands went still. A man named Redding. The name hit the cabin like a thunderclap in a silent room. Pa owed him money from before we were born, from a business deal that went wrong. Redding held the note, and when Pa couldn't pay, Redding took it out in other ways. Had Pa move things for him. Crates, barrels, things Pa wasn't supposed to open or ask about. Nash turned his head on the pillow, looked at her. People, Lenny. Pa moved people for Galt Redding, in crates, like cargo. The herb grinder slipped from her fingers, hit the table. He didn't know at first, or that's what he told himself. But he knew eventually, and he kept doing it because the debt never shrank. It only grew. And one winter, Pa went down the mountain to make a delivery, and he never came back. Nash's voice was flat, emptied of emotion. The way you tell a story you've told yourself 1,000 times until the edges are worn smooth and the horror is just fact. They found his body at the bottom of a gulch, said his horse threw him, said it was an accident. Everett believed it. Perry was too young to question it. But I found the letter. What letter? In Pa's things, after we buried him. A letter from Redding, saying the debt was paid in full, dated 2 days before Pa died. Lenny understood. The debt was paid because the debtor was eliminated. No more loose ends. No more man who knew too much and might one day talk. Everett doesn't know, she asked. Everett knows Pa was a good man. I never showed him the letter. Why not? Nash stared at the ceiling. Because Everett needed Pa to be good. He needed something to be good, after Martha and the boy died. A pause. Martha was his wife. The boy was his son. Typhoid. 5 years ago. 3 days apart. Everett buried them both himself. Lenny sat motionless. The cabin was silent except for the stove. After that, Everett stopped talking, stopped going to town, stopped being Everett. He just became the mountain. Cold, hard, functional. And I thought if I took away his father too, if I showed him the letter and proved that the man who taught him how to be good was actually complicit in something monstrous, I thought it would kill whatever was left of him. Nash looked at her, and for the first time she saw the full weight of what this man carried. Not just anger, not just grief, the impossible burden of protecting someone by lying to them. So you're not the only one with secrets, Lenny Cahill. Lenny stood. She walked to Nash's cot. She pulled the blanket up over his chest, smoothed it down. A gesture so small and so maternal that it surprised them both. Redding didn't come here by accident, she said quietly. He sent me here, or he let me come here, because he knew this is where you were. The sons of a man who once worked for him. Nash closed his eyes. 2 birds, 1 net. Yes. So we're all trapped. No. Lenny's voice was steady. The steadiest it had been since the night she shot Pruitt. We're all connected. There's a difference. The winter ground on. January became February. The cold became a living thing they shared the cabin with. An uninvited fifth occupant that pressed against every wall and slipped through every crack. But something had changed inside those walls. Nash healed, slowly, stubbornly. He graduated from the cot to the crate to the chair. He began whittling to keep his hands busy. Small things, a spoon, a comb, a bird that looked more like a lump with a beak. He gave the comb to Lenny without ceremony. Just set it on the table where her plate usually went. She used it every morning, where he could see. Perry kept the snare lines and the woodpile and the steady optimism that seemed to be his birthright. He talked to Lenny about books, about the world beyond the mountains, about a girl in Philadelphia whose letters he kept in a tin box under his bedroll. You should write to her, Lenny said. She wouldn't want a mountain man. You'd be surprised what a woman wants. And Everett. Everett remained Everett. Granite. Amber-eyed. Silent. But the silences had changed texture. They were no longer walls. They were rooms. Spaces where something could grow if given enough patience and enough warmth. One evening in late February, Lenny was sitting by the stove mending a shirt. Everett came in from the cold, stamped the snow off his boots, hung his coat, and instead of going to the table or the loft, he walked to where she sat. He held something out to her. A handkerchief, fine cotton, embroidered in the corner with small, careful stitches, the name Martha, and below it a tiny blue flower. She made it, Everett said, before she died. It's the last thing of hers I have. Lenny looked at the handkerchief, then at him. Everett, I can't take this. You can use it. It needs to be used. Things that just sit in the dark. He paused, swallowed something. Things that just sit in the dark stop being what they were. I wasn't talking about the handkerchief. Lenny took it, carefully, like it was made of glass. She pressed it between her palms. She must have been remarkable, Lenny said. She was afraid of horses, couldn't cook to save her life, burned everything she touched. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. She was perfect. He turned away, walked to the table, sat down, poured himself coffee. And Lenny sat by the fire holding a dead woman's handkerchief in hands that had pulled a man from a ravine and shot a tracker in the shoulder and skinned a rabbit in 3 minutes flat. And she realized that the tears on her cheeks were the first she had cried in 7 years. Not for herself, for him, for the wife he'd lost, for the son he'd buried, for the silence he'd built around himself like a fortress that was now slowly, stone by stone, being dismantled by a woman in a faded blue dress who had come to this mountain with nothing but a gun and a coded notebook and a desperate, stubborn refusal to die. The fire crackled. The wind howled. March was coming. And with March would come the thaw. And with the thaw would come the trail. And with the trail would come Galt Redding. But tonight the cabin was warm. Nash was whittling. Perry was reading. Everett was drinking coffee. And Lenny was holding a handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender and loss. And for one night, just one, that was enough. March came like a promise nobody asked for. The thaw started at the lower elevations. Lenny heard it before she saw it, a sound beneath the silence, a deep tectonic groaning as the ice on the creek began to fracture, then a crack like cannon fire that echoed off the peaks and sent birds scattering from the pines. The snow didn't melt gracefully, it collapsed, whole sections of hillside slumping downward in heavy waterlogged sheets. The roof of the cabin leaked in 3 places. The floorboards turned slick with tracked-in mud. The world outside went from blinding white to a bruised, saturated brown overnight. And the trail to Sparrow Creek began to emerge, like a scar revealing itself beneath a bandage. Lenny stood on the porch and watched it happen, the narrow ribbon of packed earth appearing through the receding snow. Switchback by switchback, mile by mile, a road back to the world. a road that worked both ways. 6 weeks, Everett said behind her. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes on the same trail. Maybe less. The pass will be open by mid-April. 6 weeks until the mountain was no longer a fortress. 6 weeks until anyone could walk up that trail, including men with Italian boots and orders from Galt Redding. "We need to prepare," Lenny said. "We will." She turned and looked at him. Really looked. The winter had changed Everett Drummond in ways she was still cataloging. The granite was still there. The silence. The controlled economy of movement and speech. But there were cracks now, fissures where light got in. He stood closer to her than he used to. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. Everett. He'll come with men. More than one. More than three. Redding doesn't take chances. Neither do I. He pushed off the doorframe, walked past her, down the steps, into the mud, heading for the lean-to where Nash was testing his leg for the first time in weeks. Walking in slow, careful circles around Buckshot's pen, grimacing with each step but refusing to stop. Perry was on the ridge above the cabin, checking the snare lines, scanning the tree line the way Everett had taught him, looking for tracks that shouldn't be there. They were already a unit. Lenny realized it watching them. 4 people who had been forged together by cold and crisis and confession. Not a family yet, but something harder than a family. Something with edges. A perimeter. Wolves came first, early April, the hunger moon. That terrible stretch of late winter when the game was gone and the new growth hadn't started, and every predator on the mountain was gaunt and desperate and willing to take risks no healthy animal would consider. Lenny was in the lean-to, feeding Buckshot. The mule was restless, stamping, ears pinned back. She knew the signs. Something was out there. She stepped to the edge of the lean-to and looked. 50 yards, on a crest of wind-scoured ice. A timber wolf, massive, ribs showing through its dull winter coat. Yellow eyes locked on the mule. Behind it, moving through the trees. 2 more. Flanking. Lenny's blood went cold, then hot, then very, very still. Everett. She didn't shout. She projected. The way you call across a canyon. Controlled. Carrying. Wolves 3. She heard the cabin door bang open, heard his boots on the porch, heard him swear, a single word, low and fervent. "Get inside," he called. He had no rifle. It was on the table. He had his belt knife and nothing else. Lenny didn't get inside. She went through the cabin door, past Everett, past Nash, who was struggling to his feet, past Perry, who was reaching for the shotgun. She went straight to the table, where Everett Sharp's rifle sat. The big one, the buffalo gun. 12 pounds of walnut stock and octagonal barrel chambered in 50-90. A weapon designed to drop a 2,000-pound bison at 300 yards. She picked it up. "Put that down," Everett said behind her. He was in the doorway now, reaching for her. "That trigger is hair set, if you don't know what you're..." Lenny stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her. The light hit her. The lead wolf had broken into a run, 40 yards, 35, coming straight for the lean-to, for Buckshot, for the only pack animal they had. The animal that meant the difference between survival and starvation. She brought the rifle up. 12 pounds. The stock settled against her right shoulder like it belonged there. Because it did belong there. Because she had fired rifles just like this one for 7 years. Standing on ridgelines above stolen cattle. Keeping marshals at a distance. Doing the work that Galt Redding's brand entitled him to demand. She thumbed the hammer back. The click was loud and metallic and final. The wolf was at 25 yards. Running flat out, a gray blur against the white snow. Lenny exhaled, a long, slow plume of white breath in the freezing air. She tracked the moving target, didn't lead it too far. The 50-90 was slow, but it hit like a freight train. She let the front sight settle, let her heart beat steady, let everything go quiet inside her head the way it always went quiet when she had a target. She squeezed. The rifle roared. The sound was enormous, a deafening percussive blast that rolled off the mountain peaks and came back in layers of echo. Black powder smoke erupted from the barrel in a thick, sulfurous cloud. The recoil slammed into her shoulder with the force of a mule kick. She absorbed it, shifted her weight back through her legs, rode it the way you ride a wave, the way someone had taught her a long time ago in a life she didn't talk about. 50 yards away, the lead wolf was thrown sideways, hit the snow, didn't move, didn't twitch, dead before it landed. The other two wolves broke, scattered into the tree line like smoke on the wind. Gone. Silence rushed back in. That heavy, ringing silence that follows a gunshot in the mountains. The smoke cleared slowly in the still air. Lenny lowered the rifle. She turned around. All three Drummond brothers were on the porch, staring at her. Everett's hand was still extended from when he'd tried to stop her. Frozen in midair. His mouth was slightly open, which was the most expression Lenny had ever seen on his face. Nash was gripping the porch rail, knuckles white, not from pain, from the sheer brain-scrambling shock of watching a 115-pound woman in a cotton dress fire a 12-pound buffalo gun from the shoulder and drop a running wolf at 50 yards. Perry looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Lenny held the rifle out to Everett. Barrel down, stock first, proper. Told you it kicks, she said. She walked back inside, and behind her 3 brothers stood in the cold, staring at the dead wolf in the snow, staring at the empty doorway. Finally understanding, completely and irrevocably understanding exactly who Lenny Cahill was. Not a mail-order bride, not a bookkeeper, not a victim. A weapon, one that had been pointed at the wrong targets for 7 years, and had finally found something worth defending. Everett came inside, closed the door, set the rifle on the table, looked at her. You were a shooter. For Redding. Not a question. For the Mollister outfit that worked under him. They moved stolen stock. I rode the ridge, kept the law at a distance. She sat on her crate, pulled the blanket over her shoulders. Martha's handkerchief was in her pocket. She touched it through the fabric. I was 15 when they put a rifle in my hands. I was good at it. That was my curse. Your curse saved the mule. Today it did. Everett sat across from her, the table between them, the rifle between them, the truth between them. No more secrets, he said. From now, nothing hidden, not from me, not from them. Lenny met his eyes, those amber eyes that had watched her for months, reading her, tracking her, assembling the picture piece by piece. And now the picture was complete, and he was still sitting there, still looking at her, not with horror, not with judgment, with recognition. No more secrets, she said. He nodded. Once. The conversation was over. He stood, walked to the door. I'm skinning that wolf. Fur's thick this time of year. We can use the pelt. And just like that, the world kept turning. The marshal arrived on a Tuesday. Lenny knew it was Tuesday because Perry's pine board calendar had graduated from scratch marks to actual dates now that the monotony of deep winter had broken. Tuesday, April 14th. A cool, bright morning with the mud hardening in the sun and the first green shoots appearing along the creek bank. Everett had gone to Sparrow Creek for powder and lead and salt. They were running dangerously low on all 3. He had taken buckshot and left at dawn with the sharps across his shoulder and a list in his pocket that Lenny had written because she had better handwriting and because Everett's spelling was in Perry's diplomatic words creative. He came back 6 hours later, without the supplies. He walked through the door. His face told the story before his mouth did. Something tight in his jaw, something cold in his eyes. There's a federal marshal in town, Everett said. Name of Crowell. He's asking about you. Lenny's hands stopped moving over the dough she was kneading. Her fingers sank into the soft mass and stayed there. Asking what? He has a warrant, Lenny, for your arrest, not as a witness, as a co-conspirator. Redding filed charges in Denver. Says you were his business partner. says you embezzled, says you set the fire that destroyed his records and stole proprietary documents. The room was very still. He turned it around, Lenny whispered. He made me the criminal. The marshal showed me the warrant. Your name, your description. It's official. Nash was sitting at the table. His leg was healing but still stiff. He leaned forward. What did you tell him? Everett looked at his brother, then at Lenny, then at the floor. I told him she was my wife. The words landed like stones dropped from a great height. Perry's head snapped up from his book. Nash's eyebrows climbed. Lenny stopped breathing. The marshal asked for proof, Everett continued. His voice was even, measured, the voice of a man who had made a calculation and was reporting the result. Marriage certificate, church record. I told him we were married by the Reverend Fitch last autumn, before the past closed. Were we? Lenny asked. No. So you lied to a federal marshal. I bought time, a few days, maybe a week. Crowell went to check with Fitch. When Fitch tells him there's no record, Crowell comes back with iron. Silence. The stove ticked, the wind gentler now but still persistent, pressed against the windows. Nash spoke first. Then we need a record. Everyone looked at him. Get Fitch up here. Do it for real. A married woman can't be compelled to testify against her husband's household in territorial court. And a husband has legal claim to protect his wife from unlawful seizure. Nash's voice was hard, practical, the voice of a man whose father had taught him the law even while breaking it. It won't stop the warrant, but it slows it down, gives us standing. Perry closed his book. Is that what you want, both of you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everett looked at Lenny across the cabin. She looked back. And in that look was everything they hadn't said. Every cup of coffee. Every silence that had become a conversation. Every night he had kept the fire burning while she slept. Every morning she had ground the beans and set 4 cups on the table. This wasn't a romance. Not the kind in Perry's novels. There were no flowers, no sonnets, no moonlit declarations. This was 2 people made of the same scarred, stubborn, hard-bitten material, recognizing that they were stronger together than apart, and that the feeling underneath the practicality, the one neither of them had named, was the most terrifying thing either of them had ever faced. More terrifying than wolves. More terrifying than Galt Redding. Because wolves and outlaws could only kill you. But this unnamed thing, this could break you. Lenny, Everett said. He crossed the room, stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. I lost a wife and a son 5 years ago. Typhoid. I buried them in the meadow behind the cabin where the wildflowers grow in June because Martha loved wildflowers. His voice was low, rough, each word dragged up from a depth he hadn't visited in years. After that, I stopped. Everything stopped. I built a wall and I put myself behind it, and I decided that was where I'd stay until the mountain took me. And then you showed up in a red dress, with a gun in your luggage and secrets in your eyes. And you made coffee. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. You made coffee, and I drank it, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't want to go back behind the wall. Lenny's eyes were bright. She blinked. Once, twice. The tears didn't fall because she was Lenny Cahill and she had promised herself a long time ago that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. I'm not asking you to love me, Everett said. I'm not sure I know what that word means anymore. But I'm asking you to stay, on this mountain, in this cabin, with me and my brothers who are loud and difficult, and one of them still can't walk straight. I can hear you, Nash called from the table. And I'm asking because when you walked into that blizzard-defying Nash, I was afraid. For the first time in 5 years, afraid of losing someone again. And if I'm going to be afraid, I'd rather be afraid with you than numb without you. Lenny reached up. She touched the collar of her dress, where the brand hid beneath the cotton, the R that Galt Redding had burned into her skin to mark her as his. I don't need someone to save me, she said. I know. I don't need permission to stay. I know that too. Then why are you asking? Everett's hand came up, slowly, giving her time to pull away, time to flinch. She didn't. His rough, calloused fingers touched her jaw, gently, so gently that it almost undid her. Because you deserve to be asked, for once in your life, instead of told. The tears fell then, just two, one from each eye, tracking down her cheeks in silent parallel lines. She caught them with the back of her hand, angry at them, grateful for them. Yes, she said, I'll stay. Perry rode down to Sparrow Creek that afternoon. He came back the next morning with Reverend Odell Fitch, a thin, angular man with a face like a kind hatchet and a voice that could fill a church or a courtroom with equal authority. The wedding happened at the table. No flowers, no music, no guests except the ones who lived there. Lenny wore her blue work dress because the red one was beyond repair and because Everett said he liked the blue one better anyway, which was the most romantic thing he had ever said and probably ever would say. Fitch read from a Bible so old the spine was held together with fishing line. Perry stood witness and cried, which he denied afterward, in which Nash teased him about for weeks. Nash sat in his chair with his splinted leg propped on a crate and served as second witness and did not cry. But his eyes were suspiciously bright. Everett took her hand. I, Everett Drummond, take you, Lenny Cahill, as my wife, in this cabin, on this mountain, before God and my brothers, for as long as the fire burns and the creek runs and the snow falls. Lenny took his hand. I, Lenny Cahill, take you, Everett Drummond, as my husband, not because I need shelter, not because I need protection, but because I choose you, freely, for the first time in my life, freely. Fitch pronounced them married. Everett kissed her, brief, firm, a kiss that tasted like coffee and wood smoke and the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of choosing to not be alone anymore. Nash raised his tin cup. To the most heavily armed bride in Colorado territory. Perry raised his. To family. Lenny raised hers. To the fire that keeps burning. They drank. They ate Perry's terrible biscuits. They laughed. Actual laughter in a cabin that hadn't heard it in years. And when the evening came, and the light turned gold, and the shadows grew long, Lenny stood on the porch and looked in at the mountains and felt something she barely recognized. Home. This was home. The door closed softly behind them that night, and when morning came, everything had changed between them. May arrived. The trail was dry, the pass was open, and the reckoning came on horseback. They had prepared. Everett had spent 2 weeks fortifying the approach to the cabin. Deadfall barriers on the lower switchbacks. Trip lines rigged to tin cans filled with pebbles. Noisemakers. Early warning. Nothing lethal on its own, but enough to slow men down and announce their arrival. Nash, back on his feet now, with only a slight limp that he claimed was an improvement on his previous walk, had forged new firing pins for the shotgun and built a shooting blind from stacked cordwood on the ridge above the cabin. Perry had mapped every line of sight within 300 yards, every rock that could serve as cover, every gap in the trees that offered a clear shot. And Lenny had done something none of them expected. She had written a letter, 10 pages, in plain English, no code, every transaction, every name, every mine, every bribe, every unmarked grave. She sealed it in an envelope and gave it to Prue Gandy on their last supply run. If I don't come back down this mountain, Lenny told the older woman, you send this to the federal courthouse in Denver. The clerk's name is on the envelope. Prue took the letter, looked at Lenny with those frank, weathered eyes. You're going to come back down. Probably, but I've survived this long by planning for the alternative. The morning at hand was beautiful, painfully beautiful. The kind of May morning where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the wildflowers were just beginning to push through the meadow grass, and the creek was running full and loud with snow melt. They were heading down the trail to Sparrow Creek, all four of them. Lenny needed to present herself to Marshal Crowell, with a legal marriage certificate, with her notebook, with her testimony. They were going to do this the right way, the legal way. Everett led, then Buckshot, then Lenny, then Perry. Nash brought up the rear shotgun across his saddle. They made it 2 miles. The ravine, the narrow section where the trail cut between granite walls. The place where the mountains squeezed down to a passage barely wide enough for 2 horses side by side. Everett stopped. His hand went to the sharps on his shoulder. Not fast, slow, deliberate. The way a man moves when he wants the people watching to know he sees them. "Lenny," he said quietly, behind the mule. She was already moving. The Colt revolver Everett had given her was on her hip, tied down tight. She had practiced with it every day for 3 weeks. At 30 yards, she could put 4 out of 6 rounds in a dinner plate. 6 men, on horseback, blocking the ravine. 5 of them were hired hands, hard men in canvas dusters with the easy board posture of professional violence. They fanned out across the trail in a loose line, rifles across their laps. The 6th man sat in the center. On a tall black horse, he wore a gray suit, city clothes, immaculate despite the trail dust. His hair was gray, his eyes were gray, his face was composed, pleasant even, the face of a banker, the face of a man who attended church and tipped his hat to ladies and slept soundly every night despite the bodies buried in his wake. Galt Redding. Lenny felt her blood turn to ice water, then to nothing, then to a calm so absolute it frightened her more than the fear had. "Miss Cahill," Redding's voice carried easily in the still morning air. Warm, conversational, as if they had bumped into each other at a social gathering. "You've led me quite a chase." Everett shifted the sharps, not aiming it, just making sure Redding could see it. "The lady's name is Drummond," Everett said. "Mrs. Everett Drummond, and you're blocking a public trail." Redding smiled, a thin, patient smile, the smile of a man who was accustomed to owning everything he could see. "Drummond, yes, I know the name." His gray eyes slid from Everett to Nash to Perry, taking inventory. "I knew your father." The air changed. Lenny felt it. A sudden electrical charge that had nothing to do with the weather. "I don't know you," Everett said. "No, you wouldn't. But Josiah Drummond knew me very well. We did business for years. He was reliable, discreet, the kind of man you could trust with sensitive cargo." Redding paused. Let the word cargo sit in the air like poison. "Until he developed a conscience, which in my experience is a fatal condition." Nash's grip tightened on the shotgun. Lenny saw the tendons in his forearms stand out like cables. "You're a liar," Everett said. His voice was steady. But Lenny knew him well enough now to hear the fracture beneath it, the hairline crack running through the bedrock of everything he believed about his father. "Am I ask your brother, the angry one with the limp? He found the letter." Redding's smile widened. "Didn't you son the letter I wrote to Josiah 2 days before his unfortunate accident?" Everett didn't turn around. He didn't look at Nash. He didn't have to. The silence from behind him was confession enough. "Your father moved people for me, in crates, across state lines, for years. And when the guilt finally got to him, when he came to me talking about confessing and clearing his conscience, I cleared it for him, permanently." Redding leaned forward in his saddle. "So you see, Drummond, you're not the heroes here. You're the sons of a collaborator. And the woman standing behind your mule is my property. Bought and paid for. Branded and recorded. I have documentation that predates your Little Mountain wedding by 7 years." "She's not your property," Perry said. His voice shook, but it didn't break. "The law says otherwise. I have a warrant." "The law doesn't brand people," Nash said. Redding sighed, the theatrical sigh of a patient man dealing with unreasonable children. He straightened in his saddle, looked at his men, the casual nod. "Gentlemen, collect the woman, dispose of the rest." The ravine erupted. The first hired gun drew, fast, practiced, but Everett was already moving. He didn't shoulder the sharps. He fired from the hip. The massive 50-90 round caught the man in the chest. The sound was like a cannon shot. The impact lifted the rider off his horse and threw him 10 feet into the granite wall. Nash's shotgun roared. Buckshot spread in a wide pattern that took the second rider across the shoulder and arm. The man screamed. His horse reared and bolted down the trail. The remaining 3 hired guns opened fire simultaneously. The ravine became a cauldron of noise and smoke and ricocheting lead. Bullets sparked off the granite walls, sent chips of rock spinning through the air like shrapnel. Perry dove behind a boulder, returned fire with his Winchester, controlled, aimed. A round caught one of the riders in the thigh. The man's horse panicked and carried him crashing into the tree line. Lenny didn't hide. She stepped clear of buckshot, drew the Colt, 2 hands, steady, the way Everett had drilled into her every evening for 3 weeks. Front sight, press, don't pull. She fired once, twice. The first shot went wide, the second found its mark. A rider clutching his ribs, sliding sideways off his saddle. Redding spurred his black horse forward, straight at Everett. His revolver was out and firing. 2 shots. 3. The first went wide. The second kicked up dirt at Everett's boots. The third hit him. Lenny saw it, saw Everett's left leg buckle, saw the blood, saw him drop to one knee in the trail dirt. The Sharps was empty. 1 shot. That was all it held. He had no time to reload. Redding pulled his horse up, reared it. The black animal towered over Everett's kneeling form. Redding aimed his revolver down at Everett's head. You should have stayed behind your wall, Drummond. Perry fired from behind the boulder. Missed. The bullet screamed off the granite an inch from Redding's head. The horse spooked, danced sideways, gave Everett 1 second. 1 second was enough. Nash threw the empty shotgun aside and drew his belt knife. He came in low, fast, faster than a man with a healing leg had any right to move. He grabbed Redding's horse by the bridle and hauled the animal's head down. The horse stumbled. Redding fought for balance, and Lenny walked into the open. No cover, no protection. She walked out from behind the mule and down the center of the trail the way you walk to church on a Sunday morning. Calm, measured, the Colt in her right hand, her arms straight, her breathing even. Redding saw her. Their eyes met, and for the first time in her life, Lenny saw something in those gray eyes that she had never seen before. Fear. The girl you branded is dead, Lenny said. Her voice carried like a bell in the sudden silence. She burned up in that fire along with your records and every lie you ever told about her. My name is Lenny Drummond, and I am not your property. She fired twice, center mass, the way you put down something that needs putting down. Redding jerked backward. His revolver discharged into the sky. A wild, pointless shot aimed at nothing. He swayed in the saddle, looked down at his chest with an expression of genuine surprise, as if the concept of consequences had simply never occurred to him. He fell, sideways, off the black horse, into the dirt of a mountain trail in Colorado territory, and the sound he made when he hit the ground was the most ordinary sound in the world. Just a body meeting earth. The last hired gun threw down his rifle, raised his hands. Nash covered him with Everett's revolver, and then it was quiet. That particular quiet, the one that comes after violence, heavy with gun smoke and adrenaline and the copper smell of blood. The horses stamped and snorted. Somewhere a bird started singing, indifferent to all of it. Lenny dropped to her knees beside Everett. The wound was in his thigh. She could see the blood soaking through his trouser leg. Dark and steady, not arterial, not pumping, through and through in the meat. Bad but survivable. She had seen enough gunshot wounds to know the difference. She pulled the bandana from around her neck, wrapped it tight, pulled the knot hard enough to make Everett's jaw clench and the muscles in his neck stand out. You're going to be fine, she said. I know. You stitched Nash back together with worse. She looked at his face, dirt and powder smoke and sweat, and underneath all of it, those amber eyes, looking at her the way they had looked at her across the table on the morning he handed her Martha's handkerchief, like she was the first thing he'd seen in years that made him want to keep his eyes open. You walked into the open, he said. No cover, straight down the middle. Yes, that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Can it be both? Everett's mouth moved, more than usual, closer to something real. It was by Drummond's standards a grin. Yeah, he said. I suppose it can. Nash limped over. Perry followed, bleeding from a rock chip cut above his ear, but otherwise intact. They looked down at Everett, at Lenny, at the bandage already soaking through. Can you walk? Nash asked. No. Good. Then for once in your life, you'll have to let someone carry you. Everett glared at his brother. Nash glared back. It was the most affectionate exchange Lenny had ever witnessed between them. The sound of hooves, from below, from the direction of Sparrow Creek. Lenny's hand went back to the Colt. Nash spun toward the sound. A single rider, coming up the trail at a trot, a badge glinting on his chest. Marshal Crowell. He pulled his horse up at the edge of the carnage, looked at the bodies, the blood, the gun smoke still hanging in the air, the woman with the Colt revolver kneeling beside a wounded man. Mrs. Drummond, I presume, Crowell said. Lenny stood. The Colt hung at her side. She didn't holster it. Marshal. Crowell dismounted. He was a tall man, lean, weathered in the way that lawmen get weathered, like old leather left in the sun. He walked among the bodies with the professional detachment of a man who had seen worse. He stopped at Redding, looked down at the gray suit, the gray hair, the gray eyes staring at the blue Colorado sky. Galt Redding, Crowell said. Not a question, a confirmation. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a second document. Different from the warrant, different paper, different seal. I've been building a case against this man for 3 years. Labor trafficking, fraud, murder. The warrant for your arrest was his doing, filed through a judge he had in his pocket, a judge who is, as of last Tuesday, sitting in a federal cell in Denver. Lenny exhaled, a long, shaking breath that carried 7 years of running with it. I needed a... Crowell continued. He looked at her, not unkindly. Someone with records, someone who could testify to the scope of his operation, someone who had been inside. He paused. I was told there might be a notebook. Lenny looked at Everett. He nodded, once. She reached into the pocket of her coat, the one she had kept close for 5 months. Closer than the derringer, closer than the handkerchief. She pulled out the small leather notebook. Every transaction, she said, every name, every mine, every body. The code key is on the last page. Crowell took it, carefully, like it was made of something more precious than paper. This will put away every man who ever worked for him, the judges, the lawmen, the politicians. He looked at her. You'll need to testify. I know. It won't be easy. Nothing has been easy since I was 14 years old, Marshal. I think I can manage a courtroom. Crowell almost smiled. He tipped his hat, tucked the notebook inside his coat. I'll send a doctor up for your husband, and I'll need statements from all of you. He mounted his horse, paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Drummond, the warrant for your arrest is void. As of right now, you're the key witness in a federal prosecution, not a fugitive. He rode back down the trail. The sound of his horse faded, and then it was just the 4 of them, standing in a ravine splattered with blood and sunlight, in the beginning of something that felt impossibly like justice. Nash sat down on a boulder. His leg was throbbing. Lenny could see it in his face, but he was grinning, actually grinning. Well, Nash said, that was a hell of a morning. Perry sank down beside him. The cut over his ear was still bleeding. He didn't seem to notice. Is it over? Lenny looked at Everett. He was sitting in the dirt. His leg was bandaged. His face was pale from blood loss. His rifle was empty. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. and warm and looking at her. "It's over," she said. But the truth, Lenny had learned the truth, the mountain had taught all of them, was that nothing ends cleanly. The winter doesn't end on a single day. The snow melts for weeks. The mud dries slowly. The ground underneath takes even longer to thaw. The trial happened in Denver, June. Lenny testified for 3 days. She sat in a wooden chair in a federal courtroom, and she told the truth. All of it. The buying, the branding, the mines, the murders. She said it in a voice that didn't waver and with eyes that didn't drop. Everett sat in the gallery, every day, with his legs still healing and his hat in his lap. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He was there, and that was enough. Nash and Perry stayed on the mountain. Someone had to keep the fire burning. When it was over, when the last gavel fell and the last accomplice was led away in irons, Lenny walked out of the courthouse into the Denver sunlight. Everett was waiting on the steps. He held out his hand. She took it. They didn't speak on the ride back. They didn't need to. The mule knew the way, and the trail was dry, and the aspens were turning green, and the world smelled like pine sap and warm earth, and the particular sweetness of a high country summer. They reached the cabin at dusk. It had changed. Nash had spent the weeks building. An addition. A second room framed in fresh pine, the logs still oozing sap. Not finished yet. The roof was half done and the chinking was patchy, but the bones were there, the structure, the promise of space. "What's this?" Everett asked, staring at the new walls. Nash leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, trying very hard to look casual and failing completely. "The cabin was built for 3 men. There's 4 of us now." He looked at Lenny. "Figured we needed more room." Perry appeared in the doorway. "I built shelves, for the herbs, along the south wall where the light comes in." Lenny stood in the yard, looking at the cabin, at the new room, at the shelves visible through the open window frame, at Nash's attempt at a casual expression in Perry's hopeful smile. She pressed Martha's handkerchief to her mouth, not to stifle a sob, to hold in the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful feeling of being somewhere she wasn't going to leave. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, but she filled them with everything, every mile she had walked, every name she had carried, every night she had spent behind an elk hide curtain wondering if she would ever stop running. Nash nodded, cleared his throat, looked at the sky. "Don't mention it. Seriously, don't. This is already the most emotional I've been since the leg." Perry laughed. Lenny laughed. And Everett, standing beside her with his hand on her shoulder, made a sound that was so close to laughter that all 3 of them stared at him in genuine shock. "What?" Everett said. "I laugh." "Since when?" Nash asked. "Since now." The summer unfolded gently, the way high country summers do, brief and bright and achingly beautiful. The meadow behind the cabin erupted in wildflowers. Columbine, Indian paintbrush, blue flax, the same flowers that Martha Drummond had loved, the ones that grew over her grave. Lenny tended the meadow, not because she was asked, because she understood. The flowers were a bridge between the woman Everett had loved and the woman he was learning to love now. And Lenny honored that bridge every day. Watering, weeding, letting the wildflowers grow. She planted herbs along the south wall. Yarrow, sage, chamomile. The shelves Perry built were perfect. Nash finished the new room. It wasn't fancy. 4 walls, a plank floor, a real door with iron hinges he had forged himself. He set the last hinge in place on a Saturday afternoon and swung the door 3 times to test it and pronounced it adequate, which from Nash was a 5-star review. Perry wrote a letter to the girl in Philadelphia. Lenny helped him with the wording, not the substance. Perry knew what he wanted to say, but the commas. The boy needed help with commas. "Just say what you feel," Lenny told him. "What if what I feel sounds foolish? Then she'll know it's real. Only real things sound foolish." He sent the letter. Everett healed, slowly, stubbornly. Drummond men did not heal quickly because that would imply vulnerability. He limped for 6 weeks. Lenny changed his bandages every morning. He complained every time. She ignored the complaints every time. It became their ritual, their language. The way some couples had poetry and flowers, Lenny and Everett had gauze and grumbling. One evening in late July, Lenny sat on the porch. The sun was going down behind the peaks. The sky was that impossible Colorado color, gold and pink and deep, deep blue. The air smelled like pine and wild sage, and the particular sweetness of a mountain evening in summer. Everett came out, sat beside her. 2 chairs now. He had built the second one in June, without being asked, without saying why. They sat in silence, their silence, the one that wasn't empty anymore. Everett, I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her, the amber eyes, the weathered face, the mouth that had learned slowly and reluctantly how to curve upward. I know, he said. Do you? I built you a chair. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from the belly and surprised her every time because she still wasn't used to it, the sound of her own joy. Inside the cabin, Nash was whittling. He had moved from lumpy birds to recognizable animals. The wolf on the shelf above the stove was actually quite good. He would deny this if anyone mentioned it. Perry was reading a letter from Philadelphia. His ears were red. His smile was enormous. He kept reading the same paragraph over and over, which told Lenny everything she needed to know about what that paragraph said. And Lenny Cahill Drummond, 22 years old, 5'3", honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders because there was nobody left to hide from. She sat on a hand-built chair on the porch of a hand-built cabin on a mountain in Colorado, and she watched the last light drain from the sky, and she felt the warmth of the man beside her, and the solidity of the wood beneath her, and the quiet, unbearable sweetness of being somewhere she had chosen to stay. She didn't want to run. For the first time in her entire life, she didn't want to be anywhere else. The stove was lit, the creek was running, the chairs were built, the fire was burning. And up on the mountain, a woman who had been branded as property had become the heart of a family that never should have existed but did. Because sometimes the best things in this life aren't the things you plan for. They're the things you win at the poker table of fate with nothing but a pair of eights and the stubborn, reckless, magnificent refusal to fold. The sun went down, the stars came out, and the mountain stood watch over 4 people who had found in the most unlikely place and in the most unlikely way the thing that every human heart is searching for. Home. Not a cabin, not a mountain, not 4 walls and a roof,